Hello, everyone. We are happy you have joined us. If this is your first Aspen Family Business Group webinar, welcome. And if you have attended previous webinars, welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about job descriptions and performance management. This is actually the first part of a two-part series. So if you feel like you haven't gotten enough this time, you'll get more in part 2 in August. And just calling out a couple housekeeping items. We are using the Q&A feature in this webinar where we would love for you to pose questions, answer our questions. You can remain anonymous if that's your preference, which is why we use Q&A versus the chat feature. Joining me, I am Shelley Taylor, Executive Director of the Aspen Family Business Group, and joining me today, leading this webinar, are Donnel Nunes and Natalie McVeigh. And I am going to hand it over to them.
Thank you for joining us today. Natalie and I are going to be jumping into the topic of job descriptions and performance management and family business, and thinking about how in a non-family business, job descriptions may be, fully adequate for capturing what's important when you're trying to, help somebody move up the chain and identify what it is that they're going to be doing relative to their role assignment. But when we think about family business, there's a lot more at play. And as a result, it's really important that we're also thinking about job descriptions going hand in hand with performance management so that we can think about some of the things that impact the way a person might progress as they move through the family business, from things that are practical, but also things that take into consideration some of the emotional complexity around this kind of transition. And Natalie, I'm curious, you do a lot of this work with your clients. What are some of the common things that you see surfacing around this topic as we begin exploring some of the different models relative to this discussion?
Yeah, I wonder in the audience if they've had job descriptions before. A lot of family businesses don't.
Yeah, for those who are in our audience, maybe give us a quick little drop in the comments here about, do you have job descriptions? How often do they get updated?
And I'm just going to jump in. I know from family clients who I've worked with, sometimes there are job descriptions for all of the employees but the family members. So you can also note that if that's a situation you exist, you live in your family business or you've seen in others.
Yeah, so let's go into the next slide and start talking about some of these models here.
Yeah, Donnell's using this great term, what we call models, and so there's a lot of research, and there's a lot of ways that we can put a program together that feel like a process, that don't feel personal. And the reason these things happen, if you feel at all like this is happening to you, is because it happens. This doesn't mean you're a bad family. This doesn't mean you're running your business poorly. It's a natural evolution that we see along a privately held business cycle. Some of you here might even say you're not a family business. I'm the person who started it. I happen to also have kids, and I don't know if they want to join or not. Right. And so when I start a business, it's my rules, right? Natalie's business runs however Natalie says it does, just like Donnell's business runs however Donnell says it runs. And I know everything about my business, and Donnell knows everything about his business. And we can kind of do everything. We're the chief bottle washer, firefighter, you name it. And we touch everything. And that entrepreneurial phase takes a really long time. And maybe I invite some great trusted employees in that I've known for 20 years. And that's when the durability phase comes to Shelley's point earlier of having job descriptions for everyone but family or those trusted few, right? I know what John's going to do. I know what Stacy's going to do. I know what Stevie's going to do. And they take a little bit off my plate, right? Because my business has grown so much that I can't do it all anymore. Not that I don't want to. I'm really good at all of it. We know that, just like Don Ellis with his business. And we're probably talking about the parents watching this, right? That's their experience. And so they've given it to usually trusted peers. And then maybe when family does come up, we're gonna spread out some even more. We get more successful and we get a few more rules, but they're not enough. And we only kind of give them to newer people along the way. And then usually when you're in that part where someone's transitioning, we have a couple comments from people transitioning. One person saying that they might write their own job description, which is a great start. If you're waiting for mom or dad to do it, or maybe we're talking about grandma and grandpa or aunt and uncle, those entrepreneurs have been running their business so long that they probably haven't written a job description. And, I love AI. Donnell's more the expert on that. But a lot of times now they're writing about just telling AI what to do, but they don't know the rest that needs to happen, right? That would fill out that job description. And then the question is, how do we take what anyone has learned in those phases, particularly the people at the top, and how do we help teach that to other people without making them irrelevant, without making it mean, go out to pasture? Because there's so much work to do. And the hardest part is to hold people accountable. Because usually, as a mom and a dad, or an aunt and an uncle, we're very kind and we let small things go, especially as a way to learn. And now the answer is not that you can't learn, but accountability means something must happen, right? If you're late 20 days in a row and you're a non-family member, maybe you get put on a performance improvement plan. And that's really why we tend to not have job descriptions, or not real ones, or ones we look at, because I know you and I trust you. Why do I have to tell you what to do? We can probably go to the next slide. But for those who've talked about writing their own job description, that's a great start. It's an amazing start, and we can talk about ways to make it more collaborative.
Yeah, and I think when we look at family businesses, there's different ways of thinking about how people gain experience. And one common thing that I've seen in the years that I've been doing this work is that folks will say, I was raised around the business. I grew up in the business. I've been here for 20 years. And that is that measure of time. And while you certainly can gain valuable knowledge from being around something over time, there's another way to think about this that is to drive learning with greater intentionality, where you think about different ways that you can help people to strategically develop the competencies and skills that they need to help the business move forward. And, it's the idea is that exposure to the business is not the same thing as development. And while valuable, it's really, really important as you're moving things forward that you're starting to think about, okay, how has the business changed over time? And how is that impacting the needs of what we want to see from the people that we're trying to develop into leadership positions? And I'm curious, Natalie, when you think about some ways of intentionally giving experience for development as leaders, as opposed to just giving time, what are some of the ways that you help your clients to make that distinction in the actions that they're taking?
Yeah, one of the things I have clients do is create a job audit, right? So the person who's been doing their job for 20 or 30 or 40 years forgets all the things. And one of the questions is, what do you do daily? What do you do weekly? What do you do monthly? What do you do annually? What do you do semi-annually? What's that thing you do every 10 years? I have one client who's the CEO now, but he was kind of like the CTO and CFO. He was really doing a lot of things, and he happened to be the youngest sibling out of a very large family. So when he became the CEO, it was succeeding a brother. It wasn't, a parent-child dynamic. And they had a whole systems outage, and it was in a perishable industry, so this was a big deal, and everyone was panicking. They called IT and everything, and he's like, "Did anyone, check there's like an override switch to their electrical box," which is bizarre because it's an old building, and they're like, "What?" And so he got down on the floor and he flicked that switch, right? So part of this is that it isn't just how I think as a founder. Part of this is just that random stuff that I do that I don't know that I'm doing. You've all heard that it takes 10,000 hours to make a master. It also takes 10,000 hours to make a moron. So if you don't know why that person is doing that thing, if you don't know how they're thinking about it, it's not helpful. And so one of the things I ask my clients to do, I do a really good job of that audit, and I think Donnel does too. And actually everyone at AFBG does a really good job. But if you do that audit where you let that uncle or aunt or that parent be the author and the expert of everything, you're going to see something else come out when you ask those questions interactively versus filling out a form. And the great thing about family companies and what these set up is set up opportunities that you only get to do what you like to do. The research says if you use 6% of your strengths in the workplace, you're going to be 60% more effective. So mom or dad or aunt or uncle might have been the one CEO working 24/7, but you might be, a CEO that doesn't. Your COO might be there. And so you get to then pick and choose what fits that role for you and discuss those kind of undiscussables early, those expectations they may have that you kind of know they have, and vice versa. So that collaborative job audit is really important. I would also encourage you not to start at the CEO. The average age of a family business successor is 45. That's what the research says. And so if you're not 45 right now, there's some time. So what other roles might you able to learn that expertise? Because when you come back to that entrepreneurial phase where I said, I know everything about my business, and I do, I can do the admin stuff even though it maybe isn't worth my time. That's what being a a good leader is, and so you might wanna spend some time and some experience of those other things, and they don't feel as sexy either. So we don't have to focus at the top, right? I understand that parents' authority creates atrophy for you, but if you carve out a space that allows you 2 to collaboratively, or 3, right? Maybe it's you and a sibling and a parent, to collaboratively coexist for a while. This is going to be a much more successful process.
Natalie, I'm curious. I really like that idea of the audit, and I'm curious how you started. Like, one of the things I'll often do, whether it's someone in the family themselves or it's somebody who's a non-family employee, is I'll give them a notebook like this, and I'll say, what I'd like you to do is keep that on your desk and keep it with you for the next week or two, and write down everything that you do over the course of that time, even things that may seem arbitrary, and using it as a way to kind of catch an initial list to look at. Because I think a lot of times we're really surprised by the things that we're actually taking responsibility for. And the idea is to have them start to self create that list and then we dig into it afterwards. But I'm curious, what's the first step for you? Like, what are some things that people listening could do as a way to get that audit rolling?
Love that. I often tell people you can put it on your phone notes too, because I don't know why. I love pen and paper, but some people don't anymore.
Me too.
Um, Uh, so yes, I try to build that awareness too. And I find that interactive part unlocks something. A lot, not all, but a lot of entrepreneurs are extroverts, right? They think by talking. We have an extroversion bias, especially in the US, although we see that introverted entrepreneurs can be really successful. And that's where that part where we sit down with them and jog the rest is helpful. And again, it changes the dynamic of parent child, right? I know it feels like I'm asking you to again make your parent the author, but I think I'm asking you to get to know them adult to adult in a way that we might not do. And I'll pick on my family because it's a really good example. My dad was in the Navy. He was a submariner my entire life, right? He was underwater. And to me, as a kid, that was really cool. But my brother didn't see that. My brother saw when he had a desk job. And I remember my dad trying to get my brother to work hard one day. And my brother was like, "You're just a desk jockey." Right? We don't actually see our parents' maturation during these things because when we were a kid, we didn't notice it. And so this way that you can ask them the questions actually creates you both as equals, and you now have more facility with this. And so I think both are great, Donnell. I think it's really hard for if you're a next gen on this call for you to give your parent the homework assignment that Donnell and I can give, but you can do that other part, right, of that collaborative interview. And those two of those things together hopefully help both of you understand how expansive this is. And, interestingly, in family business leadership, we're seeing co CEOs. We're seeing more robust C suites that involve a COO, a CFO, a CTO, all of these things that back in the day used to just be mom or dad calling themselves president. And if that's true, if your parents really are living and breathing the business 24/7 and you want a work life balance, the structure is going to look different. So this isn't about replacing one person. This is about staffing the business in a sustainable way, which most traditional entrepreneurs of a boomer and silent generation didn't do. They wanted to live and breathe the business. And I'm not sure that's what a millennial, a Gen X or a Gen Z taking over is going to do. So you get to create new positions, new new org charts that don't say the past was bad, because that's what this conversation turns into. This is really what will create a sustainable organization based on the workload, based on the positions, based on the processes, and then who needs to staff it. And I may be one of those people, but I'm not the only person. And maybe this helps you take that vacation with mom she's been begging you for. That's the first homework assignment I give most of my clients is they have to take a 3-week vacation and they have to leave their mobile phone with me because I know someone's going to call them. And most of my clients haven't ever done that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And there's something that I heard in that too that was kids don't always know what their parents actually do. And I'm not just saying in family business, but in life in general, they may just see these people who go off and come back at the end of the day. And in the family business, being able to capture some of those things can help with bringing it to where it's like child parent to more sort of adult kind of a relationship and how they see themselves by being more aware of what that parent is doing. And I'd like for us to go into the next slide. And Natalie, if you could talk to us a bit about, succession management. Like,
Yeah, succession's everyone's job. So again, I want to get everyone away from the one job because that might not be your job when you're done. I've sat with sibling groups of 5 or 3 or 2, and everybody wants that job. We want that job because it's the thing mom or dad loves the most. It's where they spent their most time. It's a lot of things that feel like I should do it versus I want to do it. And there's some great research by Pradita Sharma that talks about it's not an I ought, I need, I must. It's an I want. It makes the best successor, right? So when we're talking about succession, it's everyone's job. Again, that example of the CEO who turned the light on, that's actually was their facilities manager's job. So succession is everything in the business that needs to be sustainable. What's the role? Who has the best talent for it, which makes it feel not exhausting for them? Who's the most qualified? How do we keep people qualified? And how do we replicate it, right? So, one of the things I have every client do after we do those job audits is they create a desk plan, right? All those things that everyone needs to know to do anything else has to be put there. Standard operating procedures have to be put there. It just allows the organization to keep going.
yeah, there's an
Um,
excellent question in the chat that I want to raise. And
yeah.
and it's, this individual saying that they might be a successor to multiple people and the skill set isn't necessarily the same as any of their skill sets. So just cataloging what I have or what I want versus what I absolutely don't want to do is a top priority. And it's thinking about what skills do I need to bring in for sustainability. And what comes to mind immediately for me in this is that in succession, how critical is it that the existing org chart stays defined as it is versus where do you start to think about, okay, what is the talent pool that's coming up and what are the things that we are trying to transition to those folks? And how should it be done in a way that leverages those people that are rising? It may be that certain roles or duties associated with one position don't remain static into the future and that there may need to be a bit of a organizational reconsideration. I'm not going to say redesign, but reconsideration. I'm curious your thoughts on that, Natalie.
It almost always is. It almost always is. So when we saw at the first model where there's a question about gaining, draining, or maintaining, the skills to maintain the company that my grandmother created, that maybe my father stewarded, that I'm doing is basically it's basically like wearing my parents' suit, right? It'll be clothing, so I'm not going to get arrested for being naked, but it's not going to fit well. That's usually what maintaining is. It's me pretending to be someone else. Maintaining isn't bad, right? It's that flat. But if I actually want to gain, I have to figure out how to do it for me. I have to figure out what it looks like to test my boundaries. And it's almost always complementary skills. And I know this hand thing might not be that important, but we're not looking for this. We're looking for this. Now, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't take a really hard look at my skills and say, "Can I do that, but I don't want to, and maybe I just don't wanna push myself," right? Or can I can I not really do this and this is not really the best of my time? And who else could capture that, right? What we find for a lot of people who start businesses is they have a really unique relationship with risk that the next generation doesn't. And I personally don't. I don't have a great appetite for risk. So I always need someone on my team who's going to push me a lot, right? So it's not saying that that thing that your parent did is irrelevant. But this is one of the things that we're talking about these days. You can collaboratively work together. We used to say succession meant that we get rid of our parents. Well, people are living longer and longer now, till 100, and they actually like their jobs and they're good at them. We saw in 2020 a lot of the founders we'd pushed out, we had to pull back because it was the first time of challenge we'd had in 15 years, and most heirs didn't know how to deal with that. So, one of the things to do while asserting myself doesn't mean we have to push anyone out. We have to carve out the pieces we can take, again, allowing them to have the life that they want. And the draining that usually comes up is pretending to be someone I'm not, right? So I'm gonna pretend to be whoever I want, whether it's a version of someone I wanna be, my parents said I should be, but I end up only being able to do it for a short period of time, and it doesn't work. This is the next, when we're talking about taking over for someone else, it's usually been the last 30 or 40 years of your life. For the next 30 or 40 years of your life, do you wanna fake it till you make it? I don't think so. So it's being really clear on who you are and who you can partner with. I talk about co-stewardship all the time. They may be non-family members that you're bringing in. They should be non-family members, and we can incentivize them. That's a whole other conversation. I think it's gonna be part of our next webinar of ways that we can incentivize them where they can think like owners and not be owners.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue for the next slide.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like we're talking about identify the competencies, like doing that through something in the form of like an audit, and then thinking about, who are the folks in the organization? What are the talents that they have? How might they be able to take on some of those things that the successful leaders have been doing in the business up till this point, and then starting to have that inform the way that you're thinking about succession and developing your bench. I think about, clients I've worked with where the founder was just a tremendous personality. Somebody who could go out into the community and have a conversation with anybody, really bring people in to experience, their passion for the work that they do. And it had a lot to do with how they developed their sales and expanded their business in the way that they did. And now that they're moving into, another generation, the folks coming up may have different places that they shine that don't necessarily have them fulfilling that same sort of strong, charismatic extrovert, but maybe more sort of inwardly thinking about how do we strategically move forward and, develop the team that's going to come in. And, I think about this like how do we involve, when we have this kind of dynamic taking place and there's this transition, how do we make sure that the people who are non-family employees that are used to one kind of leader get on board for the next way of approaching how an organization is led? Natalie, do you have any thoughts on that? Like some of the strategies that you use to get people to see
Yeah.
how this might spread, duties may spread out in different ways?
I was smiling as you were telling this story because it's the story of a lot of these people, right? The founders kind of do strategy by influence, right? We all want to follow that charismatic leader, and we've grown up with them. Now, the interesting thing about me having people in my business and you two, Donnell, and everyone else that roughly the same age is you're going to have like a mass transition at once, and we don't want that. So, one of the strategies you might do is create early retirement packages for people so that we can get some people so we're not all changing at the same time because we have the same amount of gray hairs. You might want to create advisory boards. You might a lot of the other things we've talked about webinars, you might want to hire consultants. But the answer is trying to make that implicit explicit, right? That founder entrepreneur who's not always the best at communicating what is usually the best at getting you to follow. So those successors that do strategy by intention, then they just have to name those things. It's why we often see founder entrepreneurs have these great organizations for a while that never once had a mission statement, never once had a code of conduct, never once had values on the walls. And now all of a sudden they do, right? partly because they've gotten so big that not everyone knows that founder, although they enjoy seeing them at the annual holiday parties. But now a way to create that relevancy in the next generation is to start talking about that explicitly and more than you think that you need to. But again, that's where I talk about that collaborative leadership. If you don't want to be that charismatic leader until you need to hire them, let that person do that part, right? We find that most founder entrepreneurs get vectored back into what their special place was at the beginning is they can go back into sales, right? They can still talk to your top customers and your vendors. One day someone else will have to, but if that's not what you do, that's okay. We'll have to cover that gap. But but there's always more there when you dig in. And that's where you start parsing out what goes where. And one of the things we'll talk in the next webinar about as well, besides the inventory, Donnel, is let's get some objective data. Let's find some really good assessments that help you understand your runway and your capacity and your competency, and your cultural leanings and values that we also will contrast to the current set of leadership and say, okay, well then what does that say about what this new org structure needs to look like? If these things are still relevant, if we're going to still do some of the business the same that we used to. And most of the time we're going to have some overlap of legacy, we're going to have some overlap of innovation, and then something in between to fill that gap. We're never doing a 180 in a business that like this.
Yeah, and if we could go to the next slide, and my apologies, folks, we had a little technical difficulty today, so Natalie and I didn't have control of the slides. It was unexpected. But if we could go to the next one, and with this one, when with Leslie Dashew over the years, like one of the things she's always said to me that fundamentally what her work has come down to is safety skills and structure when she's thinking about family business. And in a way, I wonder if support, assess, challenge, support. It's like it's an ongoing wheel. I wonder if this is sort of the equivalent of those things when it comes to leadership development. And I'm curious your thoughts about the importance of having a sort of balanced perspective in the way that you take these things on.
Absolutely, yes. Safety support, skills, and this assess challenge support, whatever model works for you is great. And the point is, and that was the question to the person who's saying, what am I good at? What am I not good at? When you get some objective assessments, we also can get them from 360s, like interviews and the thing about what someone else sees about us is that, 85% of us think we're self-aware. This is Dr. Tasha Urich's research. But it's the truth is only 10 to 15% of us are. So you can't do this alone. And that's that idea of what I can and cannot do. So I'll pick on myself. I English is not my thing. I speak other languages. I'm super dyslexic. I cannot find spelling errors. I have tried my whole life. Now I just pay somebody when it's important and it's going to get published. If it's an email, sorry, I'm going to make spelling errors. But I tried really early on to fix that about me. It's never going to happen. So that's the challenge, right? I challenge myself to be better at spelling. It's not a thing. I literally can't see it. So now I have a support need that's going to hopefully help me do written language because it's a necessity. And then we assess how that works. And that's the same for all of you. And so one of the things that sometimes parents don't do, we kind of see two types of parents in these businesses. We see the parent who's just overly critical for no reason because they don't want their kids to look like nepotism babies. And so they might be overly challenging you, which is uncomfortable. So that challenge has to come, or as Leslie would say, safety. Safety doesn't mean you're not going to feel tense, but that it should be there. That support really then says, okay, how do we close that gap? And or the attaboy you need along the way, because we tend to build on success. And then we keep doing that model throughout. And your parents in some ways are still doing it too, right? I've seen most of these founder entrepreneurs, when you really look at the 40 years of innovation, they actually have been doing that along the way. They don't know that. And sometimes they're in an echo chamber. And often it's their partner who helps them, right? So I've never seen a husband and wife couple that even if one is in the business, the other isn't the silent partner behind the doors. And so this is your model too. And it's a lot helpful for objective advice. That's where you can use a mentor in the company that's not a family member. You can use a mentor in the field. uh, and that's where, hiring a coach is really helpful.
Yeah, let's go into the next slide as well here, because this one here, it's the transition. I see this like this first line in here that if you love your work and feel you can and want to contribute, it's okay to stay. But how do you know when, as a leader, when that is starting to not have the impact that you think it might be? I mean, thinking of that idea of self-awareness, it's
Yeah,
like, go ahead.
go for it.
Yeah, I think that it's like there's a sort of a thing that you got to wrestle with here is that you have the choice to stay in as long as you would like, but it's important that everyone recognizes that eventually we all leave these things and we all have to be thinking along the way of what we're developing behind us. And going back to some of the earlier discussion is like, what is the legacy piece here? If it's the younger generation telling the older generation, I need you to get out of here so that I can take over, I haven't really seen any examples in my own experience and practice where that's been very successful. And in the last slide, Natalie, you were talking about the importance of, advisors and other trusted people around you. And how can you facilitate that as part of understanding more about the timing and the contributions for a senior leader when they're thinking about, do I stay or do I think about another chapter in my life?
Yeah, I think of it as an and solution. We have a slide in here about the difference of mentors and coaches, which we'll get to in a minute. There's actually, it used to just be a book, but now there are these modern elder academies that come from a book called The Making of a Modern Elder by, I think it's Chip Connolly. You can stay if you can do it differently. And I think that's the important piece, that legacy information is key. It's the thing that makes the business not spoil all of its products by knowing where that button is. It is impossible to take everything I know and give it to you in a structured setting. It's really impossible to do it if we're family, because family doesn't listen to each other. There's something called the closeness communication bias that's been proven that family members just ignore each other because we know what's going to come out of their mouth. So if you don't have a structured transition process with a coach, an external person who's out there helping you, you're going to miss something. And that legacy knowledge took 40 years to build. And yes, some becomes irrelevant as the business moves on, but some is relevant. And there are decisions that literally come up once every 20 years that's going to get missed in this job piece. But if you can become a mentor, that's gonna be more important, right? And a mentor or a coach, is different than I'm the boss, right? That says it has to be done my way. So in a world where Donnel and I are siblings and Leslie's our mother, one of the founders here, we're gonna probably defer to Leslie a little bit, partly because we wanna make our parents happy, partly because we've grown to respect her because 'cause we're children over the age of 25, right? When you're under 25, you're still fighting with your parents a little bit to know that we're good. And the more that she hypothetically responds as my way is the best way without saying those words, we're gonna stop doing a lot, right? And I actually had a leader do this. It was a CFO where she would, if you she'd ask you to write the standard operating procedures, which I think is great. And clients would send, not clients, her employees would send them to her, and she would send it back bleeding, like red marks, like it felt like elementary school, of just red all over the paper. And I remember one of the, employees who also happened to be a family member saying, "Why should I even try if it's not good enough?" And so part of that staying is not saying everything you know. If it's important, if it's going to break the business, say it. If not, it's really asking, well, show me your math. What about that is important to you? What about that strategy is going to work? And really helping them to find their own voice while they're doing this. And I think of it as training wheels, right? So that when we can work collaboratively together, I don't have to say everything I know, and we already know you're the best, but we allow some space, then stay. But if that's not the way that you're going to work on things, then it probably is time for your encore career. And we can work on that. It's not time to play golf. That's where succession fails. None of these really brilliant business people are happy doing golf, and their marriages won't be happy either because their spouse will want them out of the house again. And so it's a movement for everyone to figure out their new roles, not actually for everyone to. It's not for one person to get out so the other person can get in. That doesn't work. We're seeing 5 generations of families and companies now. There's not a world where you're not going to have to work with a child or a parent and do it in an effective dialogue that just doesn't come natural to families.
So it's interesting to me, like what one of the things I'm hearing you say here, or this is how I interpreted it, is that the key is are you is looking at yourself and asking, am I part of the transition that needs to happen in order for this to continue if for some reason I can't be here tomorrow? And in some ways that can be, am I stepping into the role of a mentor versus somebody who is more directive to others? And one thing that comes to mind is where I've seen somebody stay in and we'll say perhaps a little too long, the risk is that we go back to that place where you're giving time in the business, not developmental opportunity in the business for the generation that's coming up underneath you.
Agreed. Yeah, it happens rarely, but I'll have clients tell me their kids are idiots, and I say, okay. And they say, why are you not fighting me on that? And I say, they probably seem like that to you. Like there's something you guys are doing together that's making that happen. And so, yeah, Donnell, you're right. For anyone at any role, and we're not even talking about family members, that, some of our not external our non-family executives may remember the time that we crashed the car. They may also be the ones putting us through our paces. So this isn't all about, parent-child dynamic. This is about a system that's been around each other for so long that it's hard. You had mentioned earlier about how do we get the employees to realize I'm not a charismatic leader? Well, we also have to get the employees to feel like I'm confident. This isn't a yea, verily, I knight thee, because the employees who might not trust you yet are also going to have part of the challenges. So it's much more of an uphill battle because we forget how people change over time that we see regularly. And so this is everyone kind of setting that up. I hear you about the staying too long, and that can be challenging, but I think what people are waiting is for people to get out, and it's a much longer transition, and it's a much more discreet process of what everyone is doing, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, let's go into the next slide because this is where start to think about, the different options for how family members in particular may be involved. And, with this, it's not just limited whoops, it's not just limited to, you know, operational roles in the business. Uh, at different stages of growth in the business, there may be opportunities to function at a higher level, providing oversight. There may also be opportunities to get involved with being, part of a family council or making sure that you are keeping people connected and thinking about how that definition of connection can change over different periods of time relative to the business. And, with this, one of the things that I wonder about sometimes is how to know where somebody belongs in this. I've certainly seen it where there's been people who, when we first start doing work together, found themselves in the enterprise part of the business, working in operations. But over time, it sort of revealed that the place that their heart most resided and where they felt the greatest resonance was doing things with the family. And Natalie, when you think about some of the families that you've worked with, and you come in and you see initially how people may be dispersed over these different roles, what are some of the things that happen that help people to get sorted in ways that align themselves more closely with what is being served in these particular roles?
Yeah, we talk a lot about that three-circle model, and this is very much aligned to that. It's helping people understand how they're distinct because usually that founder entrepreneur does all of them all at once. And so job descriptions for all of these things are really helpful. And they should have them. Family council members should, board of directors should, chairman should. All of these things have those roles. And so in a world where I'm standing in the founder's role, right? And I'm saying, okay, maybe your kids aren't ready for succession. They're 30. Got it. So we're not talking about the CEO. We might not be talking about anything in the C-suite. What about the chief sales officer that you're still kind of doing as a back door? If that's not really your role, who do we give that to? And if it's not your kid, fine. It's Johnny who's been here for 30 years. And I think that job description, when we actually put it together after asking the question, allows for people to say what's in my lane and not in my lane. Now, if I'm the owner and the CEO, it's my business. I can technically do whatever I want. But to what effect? To what effect that now that I have 5 roles, is the company gonna survive if that proverbial bus hits me? And I think that's the same thing too. What I see a lot of families doing, which I don't like, is they're the chairman of the board, but they have an office in the building all day. Well, you're not really the chairman of the board, because chairman of the board don't have an office in the building anymore. And so, what we tend to see in families, instead of actually changing the role by behavior, is we change the role by title, but nothing functionally changes. And that could be the same for the young leader who's doing both ops and sales, but now it's too big to do both. So maybe my sibling or maybe a next gen who's a non family member should do that. And one of the things that I hear most often about job description is, well, it doesn't feel like family. And that's not true. We can still trust each other. We can still care about each other. We can still have executive meetings where everyone comes to. But it's really easier not to step on people's toes when we're looking at feet, right? Like when we look down a little bit. Yeah, don't know.
Oh, sorry. I was looking at it. I thought I was clicking on the Q&A and I raised my hand. So there was a question or a statement in here shared that I haven't gotten comfortable yet using first names at work instead of dad or uncle. And I've certainly had that come up a few times. What's your thoughts on the importance of that, Natalie?
It's family by family. Best practices are best only if it works for you. If it feels weird to say, John instead of dad, don't. If you find that it's changing your behavior because you're saying, y- you know, dad because you want leniency, then I would change it. I wouldn't use boss. It sounds sarcastic whether you want it to or not. For me,
Yeah,
it's about behaviors, not words. Yeah.
it's interesting. Years ago I was doing interview research with high performing athletes, and one of the duos that I interviewed was a father and a daughter, where the daughter was an Olympic gymnast, and we talked about some of the confusion associated with roles in names, and she shared how her father had always approached this, because one of the problems that they were encountering was he was her coach, her mentor, and her father. And when she would have a, performance that didn't live up to the standards that she felt or he felt was appropriate, he would critique her like a coach, and then he would end it by saying, "But I love you." And it drove her crazy. And so what they did is they came up with, 3 different names. There was dad, there was Dr. So and so, and then there was coach. And they attached the different roles that he needed to play in her life to those names. And they came up with agreements around, some basic parameters about what happens when each of those names are being used and what shouldn't happen. So, coach, Dr. So and so wasn't supposed to be saying, "I love you." And I think sometimes in these family business settings, there is a real push to use parents' names instead of calling them mom and dad. And in some respect, it's like I agree with you, Natalie. It's kind of case by case. On my end, I will tend to encourage people to use names more often when they're depending on the setting.
Yeah. Yeah, if it works, it works. I tend to think about the role when I'm in these doors, right? So if I walk into the building, I'm an employee, whether you happen to also be my father or not. But whatever works, if it's not working, then we need to change it.
Yeah, and let's talk about supporting roles, because it kind of fits with this as well. The next slide. And thinking about coaches and mentors. Natalie, out of the gate, like, how do you distinguish between these? How does a person know when they're being a coach, and how does a person know when they're being a mentor?
It varies, and you actually are the mentor expert, so I'd love your insight on this. But when we think of mentoring and coaching from kind of a colloquial way of thinking about it, mentoring can be slightly challenging when you're the founder because it starts saying, well, this is how I did it. This is how I think about it. And that's useful, but there's one way. And we just heard that from you and I, Donnell, both in this
Hmm.
field. You would say that names help. I would say I'm kind of agnostic. And if you got 15 other family advisors, you would see a whole other slew of things because we look at it slightly differently. And that's okay. But if your mentor is also the person you're trying to impress, the person you love, the person who's been doing it 40 years, and he or she always says, this is how I did it. This is how I think about it. You only know one way. And that's that thing about that father's shirt that yeah, you're clothed, but it doesn't fit. Whereas that coaching, where I was encouraging people to, kind of tell me your story, mom or dad, in kind of a coaching way. Why did you think about that? When a parent starts doing that and says, well, what do you think? And not saying everything that they think right away, it allows that young person to feel like they have more optionality. Mr. Ed actually didn't know how to do math. For some of you young ones here, you don't know who that is, but that's a horse one day that was really good at reading what his owner wanted him to think. And so it looked like he did math. And in fact, for a few independent tests, when he liked those testers, he could do the same thing. It was when he couldn't see any testers, he couldn't do math because horses don't do math. That's the trap of mentoring sometimes, is I know what that person wants to hear from me, and so I keep doing that over and over again. There's a great book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Sayer. It's quite short, and it's a great way to start changing yourself into a coach versus a mentor. But Donnell, you're really the mentor expert, so tell me how mentoring does well in family businesses.
Yeah, this is such a complicated thing, and one of the stories that I share a lot that I just love about how when we think about parents mentoring kids is something that was shared by a colleague a number of years ago, and she said that basically as a parent for the first part of a child's life, you are their manager. As their manager, you will inevitably be fired, and so the best that you can hope for is to be rehired as an advisor later in their life. And that suggests two distinct phases, and that advisor role might be synonymous with being a mentor. But I actually believe there's some different shades of mentoring. And I would say that coaching is a subset of mentoring, as is teaching. And in some ways, the different shades of mentoring is that there is almost a transition period between being that manager of your children and being someone who they can relate to as another adult, on that adult to adult level, where the mentor's role is almost to be leading from a peripheral side. So helping with the global development of someone in their family or in their business where they are playing this peripheral role of connecting the rising gen member to a community of mentors. And I feel like that's where you end up getting the most power out of that particular phase. And as it becomes more evident that a parent and adult child can share information with each other, learn from each other together, then that becomes a new chapter in how the mentoring relationship may be able to be more explicit and direct between a parent and adult child. Now, I've had cases where the senior generation and the generation beneath them are further on in their years in both cases and never reached this point. And so, Shelley and I have done a lot of work around mentoring and family business, and there are absolutely strategies for how you can manage those if that dynamic is present and you really need the mentoring relationship to happen. And one example of that is, using some of our modern technologies to where you can conduct interviews around important topic areas that need to be transferred in learning and plug those things into a generative AI or capture them and use them for mentees to have their first pass at a discussion with the AI before they have it with their parent. And it helps to kind of prepare them and also to break down the barriers a little bit around some of the resistance that can come with having your parent be your mentor. And there's a question in here. Do you have tips about forcing previous generations to become coaches when they're not necessarily familiar with the concept? Absolutely. That you are actually, your question spot on here is that if this all begins with making people familiar with the concepts and the roles. Because a lot of times, if you ask somebody, if they're a mentor, they'll say, "Yeah, I give people advice and tell them what to do," and but that's not really it. It's like the key to mentoring is that it involves being committed to the growth and development of another person in a really global way. And yeah, I think that really the trick here is that I think there's a progression, and each family has to be able to recognize it in themselves. If you're having difficulty with conveying information directly to someone coming up, it's a good idea to involve other mentors. And even if you are, it's still a good idea to involve other mentors.
I think
Let's go to
there's
the
a
next slide.
bilateral responsibility here too. One of
Yeah,
the things
absolutely.
I think that the next gen isn't necessarily the best at yet is building a business case, right? And so one of the things that falls apart sometimes is you have this idea and it's a great idea. And this is you watching your parents too. Your parents come up with these great ideas and then the business is great. And then you come up with a great idea and the business is what? uh, is you haven't quite built a business case. And so I do a lot of workshops for clients, a weekend workshop on building that business case. Because then you're like, well, you trust him, but you don't trust me. It's not about trust, is they know his strategy, they know his ideas. And so it's not enough to have a good idea. And so, yes, do I think your parents are great coaches? Categorically, I don't. And I think we sometimes fall apart under questions when we just want our parents or people to go with us. So building that business case actually helps the coaching conversation start, because when you get questions or shut down, you can start helping them see your thinking along the way.
100%. And Natalie, goes back to that audit, is that you can reference that audit for the key things that need to be addressed for succession to be successful. And those can be the topic areas that you capture that need to be somehow brought into the mentoring and coaching discussion. And I'm looking at this slide here, setting expectations, and thinking this is a good place for us to kind of wrap for today, knowing that we're going to be talking again next month, and we can talk more next month about how you put all this into action.
Absolutely. And so everyone learns differently. We talked about extroversion bias. Extroverts tend to like bullet points no longer than a page. Some of us might be introverts. We might want to write that longer, but extroverts also want a conversation. Hitting these questions as often in as many ways as possible. Donnell's mentioned already, AI can help you take the notes to summarize it, but really making sure that this is no longer, because right, we're saying we're business people, we're able to have these roles, that this isn't just a chit chat because we love and trust each other. That's true, but that's the out of the room stuff. That's the out of the office stuff. Hopefully you still love each other in the office, but that's parent kid talking, not boss employee talking. And so write it down. And if your parent doesn't, you should. And make sure you're covering these pieces and helping them see that math so they can think about it.
Yeah, and I think, where we're going with all of this is we're not trying to make family business feel like they're overly corporate or overly structured, because it's not going to solve all the problems. But it's more about being clear about, what are the expectations that can help people grow? What are the, things that can help leaders let go in stages, and without the family having to guess about what comes next, or to avoid being direct with the feedback that they're giving around performance, which is part of what we're going to talk about again next month.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there as we wrap up. Also, important to let people know that they're being successful or hitting the mark, right? Because we've heard so many times in families, I only hear about what I'm not doing right, and I don't get to hear about what I am doing right. So that's a way for there to be some objective measures and feedback in
Absolutely.
place. Well, I'm going to wrap us up here because we're just about at the hour, and I want to thank Donnel and Natalie. Adelaide put those two books in the chat that Natalie referenced, so you can grab those quickly before we all sign off here. And we have obviously so much content, and looking forward to part 2 in August with all of you. So thank you all very much for attending today, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Donnel and Natalie.